My name is Helen Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and I was standing in the lobby of a Florida beach resort with a suitcase in my hand when the desk clerk told me, gently, the way you tell someone their dog didn't make it, that there was no reservation under my name. My mother studied the ocean like she'd never seen one before in her life. My father found something urgent on his phone. And my sister didn't study anything. She smiled at me over the rim of a drink with a little paper umbrella in it and said, "We reserved rooms for me, my husband, and my child. We're the real family." I looked at her. I looked at the four of them, arranged around that lobby like a photograph that had already been taken without me. Then I said, "Then I'll leave." And I did. I turned off my ringer in the parking lot and let their calls stack up in the dark like unopened mail. 6. Then 20. By the time the sun went down over the Gulf, it was closing in on 50. Nobody in that lobby, including me, had any idea what was coming. Before that week was over, the oldest man in my family would stand up at his own 85th birthday dinner, in front of everyone, and say one quiet sentence that brought the whole gold-plated thing down like a house made of receipts. And even that wasn't the part that changed my life. The part that changed my life happened 3 weeks later, at a kitchen table in a 900-square-foot house, when someone offered me everything, and I found out what everything actually costs. Welcome back to Behind Closed Doors Revenge, where quiet people finally get their say, and family secrets come home to roost. If you've ever been left off the list by the people who were supposed to save you a seat, this story is for you. Stay to the end, because the ending isn't the one you're expecting. Drop a comment when you get there, and subscribe if you haven't. We've got a lot of family to get through tonight. Let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before you can understand what I did. I run clinical research operations for a biotech company outside Boston. 31 people report to me. When a new drug moves from a petri dish to a human vein, I'm one of the people whose signature says nobody cut a corner to get it there. I am, without bragging, very good at my job. I paid my own way through college on scholarships, double shifts at a diner on Route 9, and roughly a decade of instant noodles I still can't smell without feeling 19 again. I read fine print for a living, insurance riders, consent forms, birthday cards. My condo is 2 mortgage payments from being entirely mine, and every stick of furniture in it has a receipt with my name on it, filed, dated, and scanned to a cloud folder labeled just in case. That's a joke between me and myself. Nobody else gets it. That's who I am now. Here is who I was for the first 25 years of my life, the interpreter. My family lives in Columbus, Ohio, and they live beautifully. That's the only word I've ever found that fits. Beautifully, the way a stage set is beautiful, gorgeous under the lights, and hollow if you knock on the wall. My sister, Chloe, is 38. Her kitchen has appeared, unironically, in a regional home magazine. Her husband, Grant, is 40 and calls himself a consultant, though in 11 years I never once heard him mention a client, a company, or a contract. He has strong opinions about wine he didn't pay for and a boat he refers to, without humor, as the project. My father's business card says investor. My mother redoes a room in that house every spring the way other women replace their sandals, a new accent wall, a new custom drapery, a new rug flown in from somewhere with a name she mispronounces on purpose because she thinks it sounds glamorous. Nobody in my family has ever, in my presence, discussed money. Not once. It was like weather in another state, something that happened to other people, on the news, never to us. And yet it rained comfort on that house every single day. Country club memberships with valet parking. Scottsdale every February. A new SUV in Chloe's driveway roughly every second autumn, regular as falling leaves. I want to tell you about the one time I let myself do the math, because it matters later. It was Thanksgiving, maybe 8 years ago. I sat in my rental car in my parents' driveway after dinner, and on the back of a pharmacy receipt, under the dome light, I started adding things up. 2 households. No visible income between 4 adults. A private school for Lily that cost more per semester than my first car. Club dues. 2 vacations a year, minimum. I got about 2/3 of the way down that receipt before the number started to feel less like arithmetic and more like an accusation, and I stopped. I told myself it wasn't my business. Families have arrangements. Maybe my father's investments were quietly brilliant. Maybe Grant consulted for ghosts who paid in cash. I crumpled that receipt into the console and drove back to my hotel telling myself I'd closed a file that was never mine to open. I want you to keep that receipt in your mind for the rest of this story, because the question printed on it, who pays for all of this, was a question I had trained myself, very deliberately, for years, never to ask out loud. I'll tell you right now who the answer turned out to be, because there's no reason to make you wait for it the way I had to. The answer was sitting in a small cinderblock house in Bear, Florida, 20 minutes from a resort shaped like a wedding cake, drinking black coffee alone and missing his wife. And in July, the answer turned 85. But before we get to Florida, you need to understand the job I held in that family for 3 decades, because I held it without pay, without a title, and without a single day off. The job was interpreter. Here's what I mean. When my parents forgot my flight number and I stood at baggage claim for 40 minutes with nobody coming, I told myself it was a scheduling mix-up. When the family Christmas photo got taken in matching plaid pajamas while I was stuck at security in a snowstorm, and nobody thought to call and warn me, and the photographer had already left by the time I walked in the door, I told myself, these things happen with professional photographers, you can't hold a session for one delayed flight. When my cousin got married 4 years ago and I was seated at table 9, by the kitchen doors, between a hospice chaplain and the DJ's wife, while my sister, my parents, and my brother-in-law sat under the chandelier at table 1, my mother explained to me afterward, gently, like she was teaching me a rule of grammar I'd simply never learned, the Ashfords are a family unit, honey. It's not a slight. It's just how the chart worked out. I translated every single one of those sentences from cruelty into logistics. That was the job. Snowstorm. Software glitch. Seating chart algorithm. I was fluent in it. I could turn almost anything into weather. And nobody, not my mother, not my father, not Chloe, not even me, until very recently, ever once said thank you for the translation, because as far as they knew, there was nothing to translate. As far as they knew, I was just a woman who understood things. Understanding was my job title in that house. Unlike my actual job, it didn't pay, and the hours were terrible. I kept doing it because of a promise I made in a hospital room 10 years ago, with my grandmother Ruth's hand in mine while the machines hummed behind her pillow. I'll tell you exactly what she asked me, later, when it matters most. For now, just know this, I believed, with my whole chest, that going back to that table, every Christmas, every Easter, every birthday with a 0 in it, was what family meant, and that I was the only one strong enough to keep doing it. I was proud of that strength for a very long time. It took a motel room with a sagging mattress and a view of the Gulf of Mexico to show me what that strength had actually been buying, and who had actually been cashing the check. My assistant, Priya, has worked for me for 4 years, and every single spring, right around the time I start rearranging my calendar to accommodate whatever the Ashfords have decided the summer will look like, she asks me the same question in a slightly different shape. Why do you keep doing this to yourself? She asked it that April, too, standing in my office doorway with a stack of trial documents, watching me move a meeting I'd protected for 3 months so I could fly to Florida. Because somebody has to be the one who shows up, I told her, the way I always told her, the way I'd told myself for 15 years, like it was scripture instead of a diagnosis. Shows up for what, though, she said. Not a question, really. More like something she'd been saving. I didn't have an answer for her that April. I have one now, and I'll give it to you at the end of this story, because you've earned the wait the same way I did. I want you to understand something about the version of me that existed before that lobby, because otherwise nothing that comes later will make sense. I was, by any measure you'd care to use, a successful woman. I'd built a career that people in my field respect. I owned my life outright, down to the furniture. And yet every spring, without fail, some quieter, younger version of me, 9 years old, maybe, sitting on the stairs at a family party listening to laughter drifting up from a room she hadn't been invited into yet, started rearranging things, clearing calendars, buying dresses the color of key lime pie, in the hope that this year, finally, the invitation would mean what it said. I want to be honest and tell you I didn't see that girl clearly until I was standing in a lobby in Clearwater Beach with a suitcase in my hand. It took losing the room to finally see who had been booking the trip all along. The call came in April, on a Tuesday, while I was standing at my office window watching a ferry cross Boston Harbor. My mother's voice had that bright, organized shine it gets whenever there's an event to produce, a register I've come to think of as her party voice, warm on the surface and slightly hollow underneath, like a chocolate Easter bunny. "Your grandfather's turning 85 in July," she said. "We're doing a whole week at the Sandpiper Grand in Clearwater Beach. The whole family. Chloe's handling all the bookings." I remember exactly where I was standing when I answered, because of what I said next, and because of how ordinary it felt at the time. "Let me book my own room, Mom. It's easier. I'll just match the dates." "Don't be silly," she said. "It's all handled. Chloe has the group rate." I am, as I said, a careful woman. Confirming things is not just a habit for me, it's my profession. When a lab tech tells me a shipment arrived, I check the manifest. When a vendor tells me a batch was tested, I check the batch number myself before it goes anywhere near a human being. So that night, I texted Chloe. "Hey, am I on the reservation list for Clearwater? Do you need my card for anything?" She wrote back within the hour. "Yep, all set." With a little smiling sun emoji. 2 weeks before the trip, I asked again, because I know that stretch of Gulf Coast, and I know the 4th of July week sells out to studs a year in advance. Same 2 words came back. All set. So I moved a trial approval meeting I had guarded on my calendar for 3 months, the kind of meeting you don't reschedule for anything short of a funeral. I bought the flights. I bought a sundress the color of key lime pie, because it made me think of my grandfather, who ate a slice of key lime every single Sunday of my childhood and always, without fail, let me steal the whipped cream off the top before he took his first bite. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me, maybe more than it should. I did everything a reasonable, careful person does. I offered to book my own room. I confirmed, in writing, twice. I still have the texts on my phone right now, timestamped, in case you're wondering whether I'm remembering this generously. If you're listening to this and thinking, I would have seen it coming, maybe you would have. But I want to be honest about something, the trap wasn't built out of my carelessness. It was built, quietly, deliberately, out of somebody else's planning, and it had been under construction since March, 4 months before I ever put on that sundress. I flew down on the Tuesday before the 4th. Boston to Tampa, 3 hours, a toddler behind me kicking the back of my seat with the rhythmic patience of a metronome, and I didn't care, because I was going to see my grandfather turn 85. The Sandpiper Grand rises off Clearwater Beach like a wedding cake somebody ordered in 1988 and never picked up, pink stucco, rows of royal palms, a lobby fountain loud enough to hear from the valet stand. I rolled my suitcase through those glass doors at 2 in the afternoon, sundress on, actually humming, and I spotted my family before they spotted me. They were arranged around the pool bar in new sun hats and old confidence, tanned in that specific way that says we got here early. Which, I would learn, they had. They'd all flown down Monday, a full day ahead of schedule, and nobody had thought the change was worth a phone call to the one relative flying in from out of state. My niece, Lily, 6 years old, the only Ashford who has ever run toward me instead of glancing up and deciding whether I'm worth the trip, hit my knees like a small, sun-warmed linebacker. "Aunt Helen." We saw a dolphin and Daddy said a word. For 1 full second, holding that sweaty, delighted little girl in the Florida light, I thought, this is why you keep coming back. Then I set her down, told her I'd hear all about the word later, and walked to the front desk to check in before joining them, because I wanted to hang up my dress and put on sunscreen like a responsible adult, instead of arriving at a pool bar smelling like an airport. The clerk was young and kind, and she typed, and she frowned, and she typed again, slower the second time, the way people type when they're privately hoping the computer will change its answer if they just give it another chance. Then she looked up at me with the first completely honest expression I had seen since I left Logan Airport and said, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I don't see a reservation under that name." I did what careful people do. I spelled it. Mercer. I handed over my ID. I suggested she check under my father's name, Frank Mercer, or under the group block, Ashford, since that was Chloe's married name. She found the block right away. 4 rooms. My parents. Chloe and Grant. A room for Lily with a connecting door. A 4th room, technically listed under the group for a late checkout, that I would later learn was being used to store beach chairs, a folding wagon, and a stroller. There was no 5th room. There had never been a 5th room. Could I just book something? I asked, already reaching for my wallet, still assuming this was a clerical hiccup, a dropped keystroke, fixable the way most of life's small problems are fixable, with a credit card and a smile. She winced, that particular customer service wince that apologizes for a policy she didn't write. "We're fully committed through the holiday, ma'am." "I'm so sorry. There's a wait list, but I wouldn't hold out hope this week." Behind me, I heard my family arriving in the lobby, Lily's flip-flops slapping against the marble. I turned around with my ID still in my hand, and here is the detail I will carry with me to my grave: nobody asked what was wrong. Think about that for a second. You see your daughter, your sister, standing at a hotel front desk with a rolling suitcase while a young clerk apologizes to her, and you don't ask what's wrong. You don't ask because you already know. Surprise makes a sound. I've heard it in conference rooms when trial data comes back sideways, the sharp intake of breath, the scramble for a follow-up question. That lobby had none of it. My father found something extremely fascinating on his phone. My mother adjusted Lily's sun hat with tremendous, unnecessary focus. Grant studied the ice cubes in his drink as if they owed him an explanation. The only person who looked directly at me was Chloe, and Chloe was smiling, the specific smile of someone who has been waiting for a scene to arrive on schedule. She crossed the lobby unhurried, sunglasses pushed up into blown-out hair, a drink with a little paper umbrella sweating in her hand. My big sister, 38 years old, and she had clearly been rehearsing this moment the way I rehearse trial results before a board meeting. "Oh, no," she said, in a voice made entirely of frosting. "Was there a mix-up?" "There's no room for me, Chloe." She sipped her drink. And then she said it, each word placed like a fork laid at a table set for company. "Well, we reserved rooms for me, my husband, and my child. We're the real family." The fountain kept trickling. Somewhere behind me, a bellhop wheeled a cart of somebody else's luggage, somebody whose family had thought to count them. I looked at my mother. "Chloe, honey," she said, and I watched that sentence die right there in her mouth. That was the entire rescue attempt. Half a name and a trailing off. My father never looked up from his phone, and his silence was, without question, the loudest thing in that lobby. I've spent my career watching how people behave when a result comes back bad. There's a moment where everyone in the room decides, silently and almost instantly, who they are going to be. This was that moment, and every single person in my family made their choice. So I made mine, too. I straightened my shoulders, picked the handle of my suitcase back up, and looked at my sister without raising my voice by even half a note. "Then I'll leave," I said. "That's all." Chloe blinked. She had rehearsed for tears, or begging, or a scene she could retell later over brunch, and I had handed her absolutely nothing to perform against. I walked past the fountain, through the revolving door, and out into the flat white heat of a Florida afternoon. Behind me, I heard Lily's small voice ask, "Where is Aunt Helen going?" Nobody teaches you where to drive after your family has just told you, out loud, in front of a hotel clerk, what you are. I pointed the rental car south down Gulf Boulevard with the windows down, because I wanted noise in my head that wasn't my own thoughts. The phone started before I'd cleared the resort's palm trees. Mom. Mom. Chloe. Dad, my father, who had not called me unprompted since roughly the Obama administration. Mom again. By the first red light, there were 6 missed calls. By the bridge at Indian Rocks Beach, 17. I let them wring themselves out in the cup holder like a jar of angry bees. Around 5 o'clock, I passed a motel from another century, white cinder block, turquoise doors, a hand-painted sign with a seagull on it. The Gull Cottage. A vacancy light, half burned out, buzzing back to life every few seconds like it couldn't decide if it wanted the business. The owner was a woman in her 70s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a crossword puzzle half-finished on the counter. Yes, she had a room. $42 a night, she said, almost apologetically. The holiday, she explained, as if $42 needed defending. She took my card, mine, with my own name embossed on it, and slid a brass key across the counter. A real key, heavy, stamped with a 7. It felt, honestly, like the first fully honest transaction of the entire day. Room 7 had a bed that sagged gently in the middle, an air conditioner with a smoker's cough, and a balcony the size of an ironing board with a full, unbroken view of the Gulf of Mexico. I sat out there and watched the water turn gold while my phone climbed to 23 missed calls. Then I finally made myself play my mother's first voicemail, and something cold threaded itself through my chest, because there was no apology in it. Not one. Just her party voice, pulled tight at the edges. Helen, call us back before dinner. It's important. Before dinner. Why before dinner? I sat on that ironing board balcony with a gas station iced tea and listened to the rest of them, one after another, like depositions. Voicemail 3, my mother again. This is very embarrassing for everyone, Helen. Embarrassing for everyone. Voicemail 5, brighter, scarier, sweetheart, we can fix this, there's a rollaway. Chloe says Lily's room has a daybed. A daybed. In a 6-year-old's room. For a 35-year-old woman with her own condo. Voicemail 8, my father, 6 full seconds of throat clearing, and then, call your mother. Chloe didn't call at all. Chloe texted, because texts don't require a tone of voice you'd have to answer for later. Stop being dramatic. Come back before you ruin this. I read that one twice. Not I'm sorry. Not I don't know what happened with the booking. Ruin this, as if there were some delicate structure, some load-bearing arrangement, that I was personally endangering by refusing to sleep on a daybed like a visiting cousin nobody planned for. Voicemail 11 was my mother again, and this one I've replayed more times than any other, because it's the one that finally showed me the shape of the whole thing. Her party voice had cracked at the edges by then, something rawer coming through underneath. Helen, please. Your grandfather is asking questions. He's asking about the rooms. Please just call me back before he, just call me back. Before he what? I remember thinking. Before he noticed. Before he did the math I'd already started doing on a pharmacy receipt 8 years earlier and hadn't finished. Voicemail 14, Chloe, her voice gone flat and businesslike in a way that scared me more than the frosting ever had. Look, I know you're upset. I get it. But you're going to make this so much worse for everyone if you keep sulking in whatever motel you ran off to. Just come back and let's have a normal week. A normal week. As if the previous 4 hours had simply been an unusually eventful chapter of an otherwise unremarkable vacation. Somewhere around voicemail 17, I called Priya, mostly because I needed to hear a voice that wasn't asking me for anything. It was almost 9 at night in Boston by then, and she picked up on the second ring, the way good assistants and good friends both do. I told her what had happened, the lobby, the frosting voice, the motel, the 40-some missed calls stacking up in my cup holder like a jar of something I didn't want to open. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing that ended up staying with me longer than almost anything my family said that whole week. Helen. Nobody calls a person 40 times to say sorry. People call 40 times when they need something, and the something has a deadline. It was almost exactly what my grandfather told me an hour later, word for word in spirit if not in language, and I have wondered since whether the truth of a thing simply becomes obvious to anyone standing far enough outside it, and I had simply never let myself stand that far outside my own family before. By sunset, the little counter on my phone read 47 missed calls, and I want you to sit with that number the way I had to, because it's a strange one. People do not call you 47 times in an afternoon to say they're sorry. Sorry has no deadline. Sorry can wait until morning, it usually does. People call you 47 times when something they urgently need is on fire, and the fire has a schedule. Every single voicemail circled the same drain. Come back tonight. Be at dinner. Wear something nice. We'll sort the room thing out later, just be there. Not one of them said the word sorry. Not one of them explained why that particular night mattered so much that it was worth 47 phone calls. The sky went from gold to bruised purple over the water, and I turned the question over in my head like a lab result that wouldn't resolve. Something was landing that night. Something they needed me propped in a chair for. I had no idea what. I found out at 8 o'clock. While the phone kept buzzing itself against the plastic table, I did something I hadn't let myself do in years. I went back through the catalog. Christmas, 6 years ago. I was 29, delayed out of Logan by a snowstorm, and I'd texted the family group chat updates the entire way, like a good employee reporting a shipment. By the time I walked into my parents' living room, the family photo had already been taken, matching plaid pajamas, a professional photographer, everyone arranged just so in front of the fire. Nobody had mentioned there'd be a photographer at all. "We'll Photoshop you in," Grant said, not even looking up from his phone. They never did. That photo hung over my parents' mantel for years afterward. 11 smiling relatives, and no me. Every Christmas since, I hung my coat on the hook underneath it and said nothing. My high school graduation, if you want to go back even further. My parents arrived 40 minutes into the ceremony because Chloe's cheerleading regional had run long, and they'd decided, without discussing it with me, that regionals came first. I found out later my mother had genuinely debated skipping my graduation entirely. She told this story once, years later, at a dinner party, as a funny anecdote about how busy that spring had been. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That was the job. Or my cousin's wedding, for years back. I'd flown in red-eyed from a conference in Denver, gift-wrapped and ready, and I was seated at table 9, by the kitchen doors, with a hospice chaplain and the DJ's wife, while Chloe, Grant, and my parents sat at table 1, under the chandelier. The Ashfords are a family unit, my mother explained to me afterward, gently, like she was teaching me a rule of grammar I'd simply never learned. Or Chloe's engagement party, which I organized almost entirely by phone from a hotel room in Chicago because I happened to be the only sibling who knew how to negotiate a catering contract. I flew in the morning of, ran the seating, handled the toast schedule, quietly paid the difference when the venue's final invoice came in higher than what my parents had budgeted, and stood at the back of every photograph anyway, because family only meant the 4 of them and whichever cousins had been closest to Chloe growing up, and somehow, in 30 years, I had never quite qualified as close enough. I told myself that was fine. I told myself organizing was its own kind of belonging. Or the dinner 2 years after that, when I made director at 31, the youngest person in the company's history to hold that title, and flew home to tell them in person because some news, I still believed then, deserved to be delivered face to face. We sat down to dinner, and before I could get a full sentence out, my mother turned to Chloe and asked, brightly, whether the contractor had finished the kitchen island yet. I told them about the promotion over dessert, in the gap between 2 other conversations, the way you'd mention a change in the weather. My father said, "That's terrific, sweetheart," and asked Grant a follow-up question about the boat. I flew back to Boston the next morning and didn't cry until I was through security, which felt, at the time, like a small victory. And here's the thing I finally saw clearly on that motel balcony, 35 years old, watching pelicans fly home over the water in formation. Every single one of those times, I had translated for them. Snowstorm. Seating chart software. Hotel booking error. I was fluent in it, turning cruelty into logistics, turning spin into weather. It was the family job nobody ever thanked me for. The interpreter. And the difference, that night in the lobby, wasn't that they had finally gone too far. The lobby was just the old sentence, spoken clearly, out loud, for the first time. The difference was me. Somewhere between the fountain and room 7, the interpreter had quietly retired, and no one, least of all me, knew yet who I'd be without her. Before I tell you about the phone call that came at 8 o'clock, I need to finally tell you about the promise, because I said I would, and because you can't understand the woman sitting on that balcony without understanding the 25-year-old who made it. 10 years before that lobby, I was sitting in a vinyl chair beside a hospital bed in Columbus, holding my grandmother's hand while a monitor traced her heartbeat in slow, patient green light. Ruth Mercer had 6 days left, though none of us had been told an exact number yet, and she knew it anyway, the way she always seemed to know things before the paperwork caught up. My parents had gone down to the cafeteria. Chloe had left an hour earlier to pick Lily up from a birthday party. Lily was 2, and there was, everyone agreed, no reason to disrupt a toddler's schedule for something as ordinary as a grandmother dying. I hadn't argued. I never argued. I had simply stayed. Ruth's hand in mine felt like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times, thin, but strong in the way paper is strong, resistant to tearing right up until suddenly it isn't. She'd been drifting in and out of a thin, medicated sleep for most of the afternoon, but around 4 o'clock her eyes opened, sharp and entirely present, the way they used to get across a card table when she was about to lay down a hand that ended the game. "Helen," she said. Her voice had gone reedy, but the shape of it, the particular Ohio flatness she never lost even after 50 years of Walter's success, was exactly the same as it had always been. "You're the one who stayed." "Somebody should," I said, and even then I heard how it sounded, like an apology for the people who hadn't. She was quiet for a while, and I thought she'd drifted off again, until her hand tightened around mine, more strength in it than I expected. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "And I need you to actually think about it before you say yes, because I watched you say yes to things your whole life without thinking, and it's the one thing about you I'd change if I could." "Okay," I said. "I'm thinking. Promise me you'll keep showing up for this family." She said it slowly, like she was laying each word down on the table face up. "Even when it's hard. Even when they don't make it easy. Somebody has to hold this thing together, Helen, and your father won't, and your sister can't, not the way you can. You're the one who sees clearly. You always have been, since you were small. Don't let that turn into an excuse to walk away from the people who need you to see clearly the most." I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was dying, and she was asking, and I was 25 and certain that showing up was the whole of what love required. What I did not do, and what I have spent 10 years wishing I had done, was ask her the one question that would have changed everything. I did not ask her what she meant by this family. I assumed she meant the people. I assumed she meant Chloe, and my parents, and every future version of Lily that hadn't been born yet. It never once occurred to me, sitting in that vinyl chair with green light tracing her pulse, that she might have meant something entirely different, that the family and the show the family puts on for each other were two separate things, and that I had quietly promised to protect the first while spending a decade defending the second. She died 6 days later, on a Tuesday morning, with my father in the room and Chloe still, somehow, unable to get childcare arranged in time. I was in Boston by then, on a plane the moment I got the call, and I did not make it back before the end. I have never told anyone, until right now, that some small, ungenerous part of me has always wondered whether that, too, was arranged, whether it was easier for everyone if the last image of Ruth Mercer's final hours belonged to my father and not to me, the one who'd actually been there for the conversation that mattered. I carried that promise for 10 years like a stone in my coat pocket, worn smooth from handling. Every Christmas I didn't appear in. Every table 9. Every snowstorm and seating chart and hotel booking error. I told myself Ruth would have wanted me there, absorbing it, translating it, keeping the peace, because that's what I believed showing up meant. It took a motel balcony and a brass key with a 7 stamped into it for me to finally hear the sentence the way she actually said it, instead of the way I'd needed it to mean. Ruthie said the family. She never said the show. My grandfather gave me back my own grandmother's words on that beach, and it was the single most useful thing anyone in my family has ever handed me, and he didn't even know, until I told him that same night, that he was returning something I'd been carrying wrong for a decade. I think about her a great deal now, more than I used to, actually, which surprises me. Not with grief exactly, that had mostly finished its work years ago, but with something closer to correction, the way you feel when a math error you've been carrying through a dozen calculations finally gets caught and fixed, and you have to go back and redo everything that came after it, knowing the new answer will be better, even though the old one had started to feel like home. At 8 o'clock exactly, the phone lit up again, and this time the screen said Grandpa Walter, and I answered before the second ring, the way I have answered that man my entire life. My grandfather has a voice like a hand on your shoulder, slow, level, sanded smooth by 84 years of Ohio winters and lumber dust from his building supply business. Helen, he said. Hi, Grandpa. Happy birthday week. A pause, long even for him. Then, I did a foolish thing this evening. Wanted to surprise everybody. I called the front desk and asked them to send a key lime pie up to every Mercer room in the hotel. One for your folks. One for your sister and Grant. Even a little one for Lily's room. I closed my eyes. I saw the rest of it before he even said it. The girl at the desk was very helpful, he went on, level as a carpenter's spirit level. Read me the list. 4 rooms. I had her read it twice, Helen, because I figured I was going deaf. A pause I could feel through the phone. There's no room under your name, Helen. My granddaughter, the one flying the farthest. Tell me why. And there it was. The whole family in one hand, the truth in the other, and 85 years of that man's heart sitting somewhere in between. Because make no mistake, this is what every one of those 47 calls had actually been about. Not me. Him. He was coming to that resort for his own birthday, and the picture had a hole in it, and every one of them had spent the day racing to patch that hole before the man looking at the picture noticed. He'd noticed. He'd noticed by pie. Grandpa, I said, and stopped, because I understood that whatever I said next could not be unsaid. Let me pause right here, with the phone warm against my ear and the truth sitting in my mouth. If you've ever held that exact phone, deciding whether to protect the people who never protected you, tell me in the comments what you chose. I read every single one. And if this story is starting to feel a little too familiar, hit subscribe now, because what my grandfather did next, nobody in my family saw coming. I decided, right there on the balcony of a $42 motel room, that I was done interpreting. But I also decided I would not become a prosecutor either. He'd asked why. He deserved the answer, unpolished, and nothing more. There was no room for me, I said. Chloe made the bookings back in the spring. When I asked at the desk, she told me the rooms were for her, Grant, and Lily. She said, they're the real family. So I left. I'm at a little motel down the beach. I'm fine, Grandpa. I promise I'm fine. No editorializing. No 20-year history. Facts, delivered the way I deliver them to a review board. The silence on the line went on so long I actually checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice hadn't gotten louder. It had gotten quieter, which, with my grandfather, is the direction that matters. She said that. The real family. Yes, sir. Another silence. Then he said something that rearranged the furniture in my head. Helen. Who do you think is paying for that hotel? I said nothing, because the napkin math from every Thanksgiving I'd ever quietly done and then quietly abandoned was suddenly finishing itself, line by line, at terrible speed. The rooms, he said. The flights. The cabana your brother-in-law is drinking under right now. The dinner Friday night. It's my birthday, sweetheart. I bought my own party. I bought the whole week. He let that sit for exactly one breath. The real family, he repeated, flat, like a man reading a defect off an invoice. Text me the name of your motel. Don't tell anybody I called. The line went quiet, and I sat there in the dark with the pelicans gone and the tide coming in, holding the first piece of an answer I'd spent my whole life not asking for. At 9 o'clock, headlights swung across the Gull Cottage parking lot, and a 2009 Buick the color of wet sand rolled to a stop under the Seagull sign. My grandfather got out slowly, the way he does everything now, pressed shirt buttoned all the way to the collar in 90-degree heat, and stood a moment, just looking at the place. The cinder block. The buzzing vacancy sign. The turquoise doors. I came down the outside stairs, and he watched me the whole way, and he did not hug me. That's not our language. He looked at me the way he used to look at a load-bearing wall, checking for cracks, and then he nodded at the 2 plastic chairs on the walkway outside my door. We sat for a while. He said nothing, and the Gulf did the talking. Then, don't polish it for me. I've had a belly full of polish today. Tell me straight. So I told him straight. The April phone call. All set, with the smiling sun. The meeting I'd moved to be there. The desk clerk typing slower and slower. 4 rooms and a stroller closet. The frosting voice. The real family. My own short goodbye, and the revolving door. I kept my voice level the entire way through. He listened the way he reads contracts, no nodding, no wincing, everything going somewhere permanent behind his eyes. When I finished, his jaw worked once, twice, like he was chewing something with a bone in it. The air conditioner in room 6 rattled on behind us. Somewhere down the beach, early fireworks crackled and quit. Then my grandfather asked me one question, and it wasn't about the room. How long, he said, still looking at the water, has it been like this? And God help me, I didn't say a word. That was the loudest answer I have ever given anyone in my life. He sat with my silence for a long time, 84 years old, hands folded, watching the last light come off the water, and I would have paid any amount of money to not know what he was feeling in that moment, because whatever it was, I had caused it by finally telling the truth. And the interpreter in me kept twitching, out of pure muscle memory, toward her old desk, ready to soften it, ready to add but it's not that bad, really, they didn't mean anything by it, I didn't let her. He stood at last, joints announcing themselves, and asked to see the room, humoring an old builder's curiosity. I showed him room 7. He took it in the way he takes in everything, the sagging bed, the cough drop air conditioner, the water stain on the ceiling shaped roughly like the state of Ohio, the brass key lying on the dresser with its big honest 7. He picked up the key and weighed it in his palm. You paid for this? I always pay for my own room, Grandpa. It came out of me without thinking, and I heard how much bigger it was than the motel the second it landed. He nodded, slow, still holding the key. 40 years I built houses for people, he said. You know what I learned? Everybody loves a house. Almost nobody wants to pay for one. He set the key back down, gently, square on the dresser, like he was setting a cornerstone. That right there is the most expensive thing anyone in this family owns, and you're the only one who ever bought one. He walked to the door, and at the threshold he turned. Lunch tomorrow. Noon, at the resort. Not for them. For me. Wear the dress you bought. He was in the Buick before I could answer. I stood in room 7 with my heart going like a trial with early results, staring at a $2 brass key that had somehow just become the most important object in my life. I walked back into the Sandpiper Grand at noon the next day on my grandfather's arm, in the key lime dress, and I got to watch something I will never forget, my family's faces doing math. Half a second, I clocked it like a stopwatch, a pure system failure. My mother's mouth opening with nothing loaded into it. Chloe's drink pausing midair. Grant recalculating his entire posture in real time. And then the performance came on like stadium lights. There she is, my mother cried, arms flung wide, party voice at full sail. We were worried sick, you just disappeared. I received a hug that was mostly fingernails and perfume. Grant pumped my hand like I was a donor at a gala. Chloe air-kissed somewhere east of my cheek. Cute dress, she said, through teeth whitened past the point of argument. Within 90 seconds, there was a chair for me. A chair conjured from thin air, a place setting, a menu, sparkling water, still water. Would I like the grouper? The grouper is wonderful. Nobody mentioned the room. Nobody mentioned the lobby, or the 47 calls, or the words that had been hanging over my name since the day before. The table talk was sunscreen and dolphins. Lily showed me a shell. And I sat there in the middle of all that manufactured warmth like a scientist who has finally isolated the variable. So this is what it looks like when they need me visible. I didn't perform back, and I didn't sulk either. I answered pleasantly, and I watched the way I watch a data set. One seat over, my grandfather was doing the exact same thing over his iced tea, quiet as an audit. 2 auditors at one table. Only one of us knew the other was already deep into the books, and neither of us was any of the rest of them. It started over key lime pie, mid-dessert, casual as sunscreen. Shame about the rooms, my grandfather said, to no one in particular. Big group like this. Chloe, you booked back in March, didn't you? A beat. The hotel must have dropped Helen's, Chloe said, smooth as her frosting voice, sunglasses on her hair even indoors. It's been a nightmare, honestly. Holiday week. Said my grandfather, and let the lie stand there in the sun where everyone could see it. Then, mild as milk, Grant. How's the consulting? Still busy? Grant lit up the way he does whenever the subject is Grant. Great quarter. Big things moving. New client, logistics firm, small but growing. Which firm is that? I watched a 40-year-old man discover, in real time, that he had never actually prepared a fake name. The sentence died somewhere over the dessert cart. Confidentiality, Grant finally said, tapping the side of his nose. My grandfather said again, and I realized I was watching a man check load-bearing walls one knock at a time, listening for hollow spots. My father got a knock too. Dad. Club's treating you well? Dues went up again, I hear. Dues are dues, my father said, and laughed a laugh with absolutely nothing inside it. Chloe's hand went to her wedding ring, twisting it around, and for one strange half-second I felt something for her that was almost pity. Lily, oblivious to everything but the shell collection she'd been assembling all morning, tugged on my grandfather's sleeve. Grandpa Walter, is your birthday going to have fireworks? Bigger than fireworks, sweetheart, he said, and ruffled her hair, and for just a moment his whole face softened in a way it hadn't all lunch. Watching him, I understood that whatever was coming Friday night wasn't really about punishing anyone at that table. It was about a man trying, at 85, to finally tell a 6-year-old girl the truth about the world she was about to inherit, before it stopped mattering the way it hadn't mattered to the rest of us in time. My mother tried once more to redirect the conversation, the way she always did whenever the temperature in a room got uncomfortable. Doesn't the pool look gorgeous this time of year, she said, to absolutely no one. For the first time in my life, nobody at that table picked up her thread. Not even Chloe. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Then lunch ended. My grandfather folded his napkin, thanked everyone, and smiled. Friday night. My birthday dinner. All of us. That was all he said. So why did it land on the table like a subpoena? Thursday afternoon, my mother came to the Gull cottage. She stood in the doorway of room 7, holding her purse in both hands like a shield, taking in the cinder block and the sagging bed with an expression she would have denied under oath. She had not come to apologize. I understood that within one sentence, because the sentence was, "You've made your point, Helen." I let it go by. She sat on the edge of the bed the way you'd sit on a wet park bench and got right to it. Friday is your grandfather's night. Please, please don't make waves at dinner. You know how he gets. He gets ideas about people. I asked her, calmly, what had actually happened with the booking. And I watched my mother choose truth over comfort for the first time all week, though only because she believed the truth would recruit me onto her side. Chloe made the reservations in March, she said. She said you'd probably be working anyway. You're always working, sweetheart. And your father and I thought, she trailed off, then found it, we thought it wasn't worth upsetting her over a maybe. There it was, complete at last. Not an oversight. A decision in March, a lie in April, a lie again in June, and my parents' signatures in the margin in invisible ink, the kind they've always used. Keeping Chloe happy keeps the peace. That was the house I grew up in, spoken out loud at last in a motel room that smelled like salt and Lysol. I already left quietly once this week, Mom, I said. I'm coming to dinner. She looked at me a long moment, and something crossed her face that might have been fear and might have been respect, and she left before I could decide which. At the door she paused. Wear something nice, my mother said. Some songs only know one verse. Thursday evening, my grandfather picked me up in the Buick, and we walked the hard sand at the tide line, shoes in our hands, like it was 40 years ago and he was teaching me to find sand dollars again. He talked about my grandmother Ruth, how she kept score at gin rummy in a spiral notebook and cheated only on his birthday, so he'd win, and how during her whole last month in the hospital she worried more about everyone else's parking validation than her own chart. Then he stopped walking and faced the water, and I watched him decide to say the thing he had actually driven over to say. After your grandmother died, I did my grieving with a checkbook, he said. Your dad was lost. Chloe cried at me. And it was easier to wire money than to actually look at either one of them. Every year it got easier. You know what I told myself? I'm helping. The waves kept arriving, patient, like they had all the time in the world. He didn't. I didn't build a family, Helen. I bought one. I've heard my grandfather truly angry maybe twice in my whole life. This was worse. This was a man reading his own inspection report out loud. I told him then about the hospital room, 10 years back, the promise I'd never once said out loud to anyone. Grandma Ruth's hand in mine, papery and certain. Promise me you'll keep showing up for this family. So I had. Christmas after Christmas. Table 9 after table 9. He listened, and then he shook his head slowly. Ruthie said the family, he said. She never said the show. I stood there with my shoes in my hand while that one sentence rearranged 10 years of my life. Then he squeezed my shoulder once, walked toward the Buick, and said over his shoulder, tomorrow night, I'm giving my birthday speech. I've been writing it for 30 years. The private dining room at the Sandpiper Grand had white tablecloths, Gulf view windows going pink with sunset, and a slideshow my mother had produced looping quietly on a screen by the cake table. I stood there with a glass of sparkling water and watched 60-odd photographs of my family go by. I appeared in 2 of them. 2. One was my own college graduation, and even in that one I was at the edge of the frame, half-cropped, like weather that had wandered into the shot by accident. Nobody else seemed to notice, which was, of course, the entire point of my life in that family. Dinner was grouper and compliments. Grant toasted the best grandpa in the world with a catch in his voice that came and went like a light switch. And then, between dinner and cake, my grandfather stood up, and he did not raise his glass. Sit down, Grant, he said. Mild Grant sat. I'm 85 today, my grandfather said. I've been rich for about 40 of those years, and I've been a fool for about 10 of them, and tonight, those 2 facts are done living in the same house. Total silence. Even the slideshow seemed to hush. And then my grandfather began to speak from memory, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man reading an invoice. Frank, Carol. I paid off your mortgage the year Lily was born. I pay the club $11,000 a year. Scottsdale in February, 9,000 more, the first of every month, wired like clockwork. The Buick your mother traded in for the Lexus, mine. Every root canal, every knee replacement, every insurance gap your policy never covered, mine. My father went the color of the tablecloth. Chloe, Grant. The down payment on the Colonial was mine. $7,500 a month, that's the consulting, son. There's no logistics client. There never was. Lily's school, $19,000 a year, paid directly to the bursar so it would never show up on a bank statement either of you might have to explain. The boat you call the project, Grant, I bought the boat. I have never once seen either of you write a check for anything harder than a birthday card. He paused, and for the first time all evening his voice thinned, just slightly, at the edges. This week, these rooms, those flights, that grouper, this cake, mine. Chloe's hand had gone still on the tablecloth. Grant's mouth opened and closed once, like a man who has just watched the tide go out from underneath a house he didn't know was built on sand. He looked around the table, slow, like a man walking a job site, checking every wall. Then he turned to Chloe, and his voice didn't rise at all, which is exactly what made it terrible. You told my granddaughter she wasn't the real family. You were more right than you knew, sweetheart. None of this was real. I paid for all of it. Nobody moved. Behind me, the sunset kept going, pink and gold and completely indifferent. And my grandfather stood at the head of that table with 50 years of unspoken arithmetic finally out of his mouth, and he wasn't finished. He picked up his water glass, looked at it, set it back down, and said the sentence. As of the 1st of next month, it stops. All of it. The transfers, the dues, the cards, the arrangements. Every penny. It didn't sound like a sentence at all. It sounded like a foundation cracking. I'm 85 years old, he went on into the silence, and this week, at that front desk, I finally got a good look at what my money built. A hotel with no room in it for the only one of you who ever tried to pay her own way. My mother made a sound like a hiccup. Grant said, Walter, and my grandfather looked at him. Just looked. Grant's voice went back wherever it lives. It was Chloe who broke, Chloe, whose entire architecture had just been read aloud like a bill of lading. The tears came fast and real, I'd never seen real ones on her before. They're different. Uglier. And then, through them, she found the oldest exit in the building. She turned on me. You did this, she said, shaking, mascara going. You've been planning this. You and your little motel and your little wounded face. You did this. My grandfather said, Helen. The whole room turned. He was looking at me steady, both hands flat on the tablecloth. Did I get it wrong? He asked, in front of all of them. You know these people. You've been covering for them your whole life. Tell me if I got it wrong. And there it was. The job opening. Interpreter, 1 vacancy, immediate start. 35 years of it's fine, it was a misunderstanding, they didn't mean it rose up in my throat on pure muscle memory. I looked at my mother's pleading face, and I said. No, Grandpa. You didn't. I want to be honest with you about what that room felt like afterward, because if you came here for fireworks, I don't have any. It felt like the moment after a car wreck, that ringing quiet where everyone is checking whether their hands still work. My father stood up too fast, and his voice went from anger to fear inside a single sentence. Dad, be reasonable, we have obligations, and you could hear the exact syllable where he stopped defending his pride and started counting his bills. Grant kept saying okay, okay, okay to nobody, palms up, patting an invisible dog. My mother wept without sound, which is how she does everything difficult. And Lily was standing by the cake table holding a shell she'd brought to show everyone, watching her mother cry, and that was the only part of the whole evening that actually hurt. A waitress, bless her, knelt down and walked her out toward the lobby aquarium. I didn't gloat. I want that on the record. There was no vindication in my chest, no scoreboard lighting up. There was a low, sad hum, like standing in a house you grew up in on the day the movers finally empty it out. My grandfather picked up his cake knife, looked at the untouched birthday cake, and set the knife back down. "Happy birthday to me," he said quietly, to no one. Then he offered me his arm, and we walked out past the slideshow, still looping, still radiant, still missing me. In the Buick, in the dark, he stared through the windshield a while. "Next month, I'm redoing things," he said finally. "Papers. Lawyers. I'll want you at a table one more time, Helen." I said okay, because you say okay to that man. I had no idea what I was agreeing to. I flew home to Boston that Sunday, and the siege began Monday morning. Understand, for 20 years, my phone barely rang with family news at all. Now it wouldn't stop. My father called 3 times the first week, my father, who I genuinely assumed had lost my number years ago, and every call had the same shape. 5 minutes of weather, then the pivot, gentle as a crowbar. "Have you spoken to your grandfather? He listens to you." My Aunt Peg, recruited off the bench, left long rambling voicemails about how family is family is family, a sentence that gets less true every time somebody repeats it. My mother switched tactics entirely, sending care packages of guilt, photos of Lily at swim class, captions she misses her Aunt Helen. Not one message, in 3 weeks of this, asked how I was. Not one asked what it had felt like, standing at that front desk, or sitting alone in room 7, or sitting at that dinner table with everyone's eyes on me. Every arrow, however it was feathered, flew in exactly one direction: talk to Walter. Soften Walter. Fix it, Helen. It was the interpreter job again. Same desk. Better title, maybe, but the same desk. And this time, the client list was desperate. Meanwhile the collapse ran on schedule, in little bulletins I never asked for. The club card declined at lunch in front of my father's golf group. Aunt Peg called that one a tragedy, and I heard it as physics. The Colonial quietly went up with a realtor who specialized, apparently, in transitions. A leased SUV got returned to the dealership. Grant posted, and then quietly deleted, a long paragraph on social media about toxic family dynamics that never once used my name but was very clearly, to anyone who knew the story, entirely about me. Priya watched all of this happen from the next desk over, the way she'd watched every spring for 4 years, except this time there was no meeting to move, no flight to book. "You okay?" she asked me one Tuesday, when I'd been staring at the same regulatory filing for 11 minutes without typing a word. "I don't know yet," I told her honestly. "I think I did the right thing. I don't think it's going to feel like the right thing for a while." "Those aren't usually the same timeline," she said, and went back to her desk, and I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that whole summer. And late one night, alone in my own paid-for kitchen, staring at Ruth's cornflour cup on the shelf where I'd started keeping it, I finally cried, not for the money, and not exactly for them, but for the family I had spent 35 years believing was one more good deed away from finally being real. That family, it turned out, had never existed. I was grieving someone who had never actually been born. 3 weeks and 2 days after the birthday dinner, my sister appeared in the lobby of my office building in Boston. I almost walked past her. Chloe without the finish on her is a different person entirely, hair in a plain elastic, a wrinkled rain jacket, eyes with actual weather in them. She'd flown up on a basic economy fare to see me. That alone told me the world had ended. We sat on a bench by the elevators, and for the first time in perhaps 20 years, my sister said true things to me. The house was on the market. Grant was updating his resume, a phrase she said like a foreign vocabulary word she'd only just learned. Lily's school had put them on a payment plan. And then she looked down at her hands and said the truest thing I have ever heard come out of my sister's mouth. "I haven't paid for a single thing since I was 22, Helen. Not a phone bill. I don't," her voice cracked into something real, "I don't know how to do what you do." For 1 second I saw her at 16, braiding my hair before school because mom was too busy with the caterers to do it herself, and something in my chest went soft toward my sister for the first time since that lobby. 1 second. Then she reached over, took my hand like a business partner closing a deal, and pitched me. Talk to Grandpa. Get him to turn it back on. He'll do it for you. And I swear, Helen, things change. You'll be included. Holidays, the pictures, all of it. You'll be family. I'll make sure. I sat with that offer in the elevator light for a long moment. Then I said, quietly, Chloe, you just offered to sell me the one thing that was supposed to be free. She left without looking back. My phone buzzed before she'd even cleared the revolving door. Grandpa Walter. Come down Saturday, he said. No preamble, he was born before preamble. Bring nothing. My lawyer's drawn up papers, and I want you across the table from me when I sign them. I asked what kind of papers. The permanent kind, he said, and hung up, because he was also born before goodbyes. So Saturday morning, I flew Boston to Tampa for the second time that summer, and I did what I always do on planes, inventory. Somewhere over the Carolinas, I laid my life out like a data set. One condo, nearly paid for. One career, built brick by brick with nobody's ladder. One family, currently in controlled demolition. One grandfather, 85 years old, in possession of a fortune, a guilty conscience, and my motel address. I knew an offer was coming. You don't summon a person you saw 3 weeks ago across 4 states just to watch you sign paperwork, unless that paperwork concerns them directly. I run approvals for a living. I know exactly what a signature ceremony smells like. What I could not model, no matter how many times I ran it, was the shape of the offer. And that uncertainty did something to me I'm not proud of admitting. It hoped. Some ancient, unkillable version of me, the girl standing outside the fireplace photo she wasn't in, sat there at 30,000 feet, hoping, finally, to be chosen. And the grown woman in the seat next to her watched that hope carefully, and worried about her, because I had learned some things that summer about what being chosen costs in my family, and about who ends up holding the invoice when it comes due. I thought, too, on that flight, about my grandfather's building supply yard, the one I used to visit as a girl on summer afternoons when my parents needed somewhere to park me. He'd walk me between the stacked lumber, tapping boards with a pencil, checking for warp, for rot, for the hairline crack that meant a beam would fail under weight nobody had tested it against yet. You can't tell from looking, he used to say. You have to load it and see what gives. I hadn't thought about that lesson in 25 years, and somewhere over the Carolinas it came back to me whole, and I understood, with a kind of quiet dread, that he was about to load me with something, and that I had no idea yet whether I was going to be the beam that held or the one that finally, quietly, gave. I thought about Ruth, too, not the version in the hospital bed, but the version from before, the one who used to sit at that same gold-flecked kitchen table with a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have and a hand of cards, and who once told me, when I was maybe 12 and complaining about being left off some cousin's invitation list, Helen, honey, you don't need to be picked. You need to be sure. I hadn't understood it then. I was starting to understand it now, at 35,000 feet, with a folder I hadn't seen yet already waiting for me on a Formica table in Bear, Florida. My grandfather's house in Bear is 900 square feet of 1962, and he could buy the whole street with a phone call. We sat at the kitchen table, original Formica, gold-flecked, the same table where Ruth taught me gin rummy, and his lawyer, a courteous silver-haired man named Dale, laid out folders like place settings. Coffee in Ruth's own cups, the ones with cornflowers painted around the rim. Outside, a sprinkler ticked in slow circles. Then, in the same even voice he'd used to order the grouper, my grandfather offered me the keys to the kingdom. Everything. The proceeds of 40 years of Mercer Building supply, the accounts, the properties, all of it, folded into a trust. Me, trustee. Me, principal heir. Effective while he lived, ironclad the day he didn't. Your father, your mother, your sister, Grant, if they need something, they come to you, he said. You decide what's real. You decide what gets funded, what gets rented, what gets earned. Dale slid the folder across the formica and turned it to face me, and the tab on it read Helen R. Mercer, in the typeface of things that cannot be taken back. You're the only one in this family who knows what a dollar weighs, my grandfather said. The only one who ever bought her own room. So I'm giving you the whole hotel. I want you to understand exactly what that folder was. It was the lobby, reversed. It was every table 9, refunded with interest. It was my sister, standing at a front desk for the rest of her life, while I decided whether there was a room for her. The girl under the fireplace photo stood up inside me and reached for that pen with both hands. Chosen. In writing. Notarized. My grandfather watched me with those load-bearing eyes of his, and Dale uncapped the pen and set it down on the folder, and the sprinkler kept ticking, and nobody said anything, because both men reasonably believed there was nothing left to decide. I'm going to tell you the truth about the next 5 minutes, because I promised you honesty at the start of this, and I'm not entirely proud of all of it. I wanted it. Oh, I wanted it. Not even just the money, although let's not pretend to be saints, the money too, but the meaning underneath the money. Safety so deep you never have to check a price tag again. And underneath that safety, something older and hungrier, the scoreboard, settled, forever. Chloe would have to call me. Chloe would have to be nice to me, carefully, professionally nice, every single Christmas for the rest of her life. My mother would have to ask me whether there was room in the budget, and I would get to be gracious about it, the way she'd never once been gracious to me. I sat at that gold-flecked table and ran the whole beautiful simulation, and it tasted like key lime. And then, because analyzing things is the only prayer I actually know how to say, I kept running it. Year 2. Year 5. My phone ringing on the 1st of every month. Grant's new venture, needing just a bridge, just this once. My mother's voice, you know how your sister is. Every holiday, a budget meeting disguised as a family gathering. Every gift, a line item. Every I love you, arriving with an invoice number attached, the way they always had in our family, except now I would be the one stamping them. I looked at the folder with my name on the tab, and I finally saw its true shape. It wasn't a throne. It was a booth. A teller's window with a slightly nicer chair, and behind the glass, for the rest of my life, would be me. The new Walter. The next envelope. My grandfather had spent 30 years buying his family, and it had cost him his family, and here he was, with all the love in the world, genuinely believing he was offering me the same store. My hand was on the pen. That's how close it came. My hand was actually resting on the pen. And then I heard it in my own head, in his voice from the beach, Ruthie said the family. She never said the show. I set the pen back down on the formica. No, Grandpa. The sprinkler ticked twice before anybody in that kitchen breathed. Dale looked at my grandfather. My grandfather never took his eyes off me. No to this, I said, and my voice stayed level, which honestly surprised even me, given what it was carrying. You're not wrong that somebody in this family should have to answer for something. You're wrong about what it would cost me to be the one holding the ledger. If I sign that, I'm not your granddaughter anymore. I'm the bank. They'll smile at me exactly the way they smiled at you. Did you like it? 40 years of it? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. So here's what I want instead, I said, and I asked Dale for his legal pad. And at Ruth's kitchen table, at 35 years old, I drew up my own inheritance, and gave it away. 1. Take my name off everything. The will, the trust, all of it. Not a dollar comes to me, not now, not later. It has to be real, Grandpa. It's only real if I can't ever profit from having said any of this. Dale started writing. 2. An education trust for Lily. College, trade school, whatever she chooses, with the bank itself as trustee. Not me. Not my parents. Nobody with our last name touches it, so nobody can ever make her audition for it. My voice caught there, just slightly, and I let it. 3. A fixed annuity for my parents. Modest. Irrevocable. Enough to be old on. Not enough to perform on. They're your son and his wife, Grandpa, nobody's sleeping in a car. But the show is over. And 4. I looked at him directly. The rest is yours, and you are going to spend some of it on yourself for once in your life. And whatever you don't spend goes into a scholarship with Grandma's name on it, for kids who are paying their own tuition. Kids who buy their own rooms. The kitchen was very quiet. You're turning down millions, Dale said, not unkindly, a man simply confirming the dosage before he wrote the prescription. I know exactly what I'm turning down, I said, and to this day, it is the truest sentence I have ever spoken, because I could feel it going as I said it, the safety, the scoreboard, the notarized version of Chosen, the last, oldest daydream of the girl standing outside the photo. All of it sliding off the table like the tide going out. I've spent my whole life leaving quietly, I said. This time I'm staying. But not for the money. For the first conversation this family has ever had that nobody paid for. My grandfather looked at me for a long time. Then Walter Mercer, 85 years old, put his hand over his mouth, and his shoulders shook once, twice, and I pretended to study the cornflowers on Ruth's cup, because some things you don't audit. You said you bought a family, I said, when he could hear me again. So stop buying, Grandpa, and let's see who stays. He signed it my way. Every page. And the last thing he did was slide Ruth's cup across the formica to my side of the table. Inheritance, he said. It's on my kitchen shelf in Boston right now. It's worth about $4. It's the most expensive thing I own, except for one brass key. That night, I didn't stay at his place, and I certainly didn't try the Sandpiper Grand. I drove the rental down Gulf Boulevard to the Gull Cottage, and the owner looked up from her crossword and smiled at me like I was already a regular, and room 7 was free, and I paid for it with my own card, and the brass key was heavy in my hand, and all of it felt like liturgy. I sat on that ironing board balcony with my feet on the rail while the Gulf went dark, and I finally understood the thing I had been circling since the lobby. I was never left out of that family for lack of trying. No amount of showing up was ever going to buy me in, because I wasn't being priced. I was being quarantined. I was the control group, the living proof that a person could stand up without being held up. And every room I paid for embarrassed every room they didn't. You can't have proof like that sitting at table 1. It ruins the show. 20 years, I'd been applying for a position that was never open. And that night, on a $42 balcony, I finally withdrew my application. My phone buzzed one last time. Chloe. I hope you're happy. I looked at it for a while. Then I put the phone face down next to the brass key, and watched the water, and for the first time in my life, the silence coming off my family didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a door. I closed it gently. That was a year ago. Here's the accounting, because you've earned it. The Colonial sold in 4 months. Chloe, Grant, and Lily live in a rented 2-bedroom on the unfashionable side of Columbus, and Grant works the parts counter at a marina, boats, at last, professionally. His first real paycheck arrived at age 41. Chloe works the front desk at a dental office. I know this because one afternoon last spring, my phone lit up with a photograph. No caption. No message. Her first paycheck stub. I looked at it for a long time, at everything it did and didn't say, and I wrote back, frame it. She didn't reply. But she didn't delete me either. And in my family, that is not nothing. That's a brick. You don't rebuild a house with one brick, but you can't rebuild without one either. My parents sold the big house and moved into a condo near the club they can no longer afford to enter. The annuity lands on the 1st of every month, exactly enough, exactly as designed. My mother sent me a birthday card in March. Under the printed poem, she'd written one line in her own hand, "You always did land on your feet. Love, Mom." For her, that's practically a confession. I keep it in a drawer, not on a shelf. Progress, filed accordingly. The force I grew up under didn't vanish, in case you're wondering. Money still talks in that family. At a cousin's wedding last fall, the seating chart still told the old story, and I was still at table 9. The difference is that I ate the cake, danced once with a retired chaplain, left early, and slept 9 hours in a room with my name on the folio. The chart isn't mine to fix. It never was. Priya asked me, a few months back, whether I regretted turning down the trust. I told her the truth, some Tuesdays, yes, for about 4 minutes, usually around tax season, when I watch other people's inheritances do quiet, effortless work in the background of their lives. And then I think about what those 4 minutes would have cost me every single day for the rest of my life, and the regret evaporates the way morning fog does off the gulf, fast, and completely, and without leaving anything behind that matters. My father and I have had exactly one real conversation since that dinner. It happened in April, a year to the month after the phone call that started all of this, at the condo he and my mother moved into. He was sitting on a balcony half the size of the one they used to have, and he said, without looking at me, "I don't know how to apologize for 30 years, Helen. I don't think there's a sentence that does it." I told him he didn't have to find the sentence. He just had to stop needing me to write it for him. He didn't say anything else. But he called me on my birthday this year, on the actual day, not 3 days late the way he used to. I'm choosing to let that count for something. Lily's trust sits at the bank, growing quietly, waiting for a girl who will never have to smile for her own tuition. That's the one document in this entire saga with no strings on it anywhere, and it has my fingerprints all over the design and my name nowhere in it, which is exactly right. The Ruth Mercer Scholarship funded its first 3 students in January. My grandfather reads me their thank you letters over the phone and pretends his allergies are acting up. I flew back to Columbus for Lily's 7th birthday in the spring, the first family gathering I'd attended since the dinner at the Sandpiper Grand. It was smaller than the parties I remembered from her earlier years, a backyard, a store-bought cake instead of a caterer, a bouncy house Grant had rented instead of bought, and it was, without question, the warmest room I had sat in with these people in over a decade. Chloe caught me watching Lily blow out her candles and came to stand beside me, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade, and handed me one without a word. We didn't talk about the trust, or the resort, or the dinner. We talked about Lily's soccer team, and a book she'd been begging to read that was 2 grades above her level, and for 11 minutes, standing in a stranger's rented bouncy house's shadow, my sister and I were simply 2 women who loved the same little girl. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to everything. But I drove back to the airport that evening with something in my chest that hadn't been there in years, and I let myself sit with it the whole flight home instead of running the numbers on what it might cost me later. And every Sunday at 4 o'clock, Walter Mercer calls me, and we talk about nothing, pelicans, gin rummy, whether Dale dyes his hair, and it is the richest conversation in my week, because it's the one thing left in this family that nobody, anywhere, is paying for. Last month, I flew down and spent a weekend at the Gull Cottage. Just me. The owner has my crossword habit figured out by now, she saves me the Saturday puzzle. Room 7 was free. It always seems to be free for me, which I'd decided not to investigate. I put the brass key on the nightstand next to Ruth's cornflower cup, I travel with it now, go ahead and laugh, and I sat on that little balcony and watched the tide come in over the sandbars, and I thought about what I'd tell you, if you were sitting in the other plastic chair. It's this. Real family, it turns out, is whoever's still at the table when nobody's picking up the check. And nobody, not a sister, not a seating chart, not a front desk in Florida, can ever lock you out of a life you paid for yourself. That's my story. One missing reservation. One quiet sentence at a birthday dinner. And a brass key I'll keep forever. If someone keeps telling you that you're not the real family, maybe the realest thing you can do is pay for your own room, and sleep well in it. Before you go, I want to ask you something, because this is the part of the story I still think about most. My grandfather spent 40 years buying a family, and it worked, right up until the moment it didn't. I was offered the exact same deal, dressed up in my own name instead of his, and I said no. Was that the right call? Would you have signed? Tell me honestly in the comments, not what you think you're supposed to say, but what you actually would have done at that kitchen table, pen in hand, with your whole life sliding across the formica. I read every answer, and I mean that. This story doesn't end for me on a Sunday afternoon phone call with an 85-year-old man talking about pelicans. It ends every time someone in the comments tells me they finally booked their own room, too. That's my story. One missing reservation. One quiet sentence at a birthday dinner. And a brass key I'll keep forever. If this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, and subscribe. There's more Where This Came From every week, right here.